Hello, guys, girls, and ghouls, and happy Halloween, the month of horror. And I should just point out, technically, it's not quite October yet, as I'm recording this. It's 1 hour away from the 1st of October, but by the time you see this video, it will indeed be the first day of October. So this is exciting for me, my first year doing this. I'm going to be doing a whole month of horror reviews. Many different horror movies, many different genres, many different decades, all sorts, including, I hope, quite a few first time watches, and I keep adding to my list all the time. But the one thing I'll try and do at least is get as close to 31 watches as I can do, if not more. Who knows? I won't be too ambitious, but yeah, this is very exciting, and I hope you guys get something out of this at home, and you can obviously watch along with some of my reviews and comment and let me know your thoughts. So I thought I'd start with a big hitter. It's one of the most highly regarded of the original Universal monster movies, and that is, of course, The Invisible Man from 1933, starring Claude Rains in the title role. It is directed by James Whale, who has a real sort of horror pedigree, going back to Frankenstein. He also directed the old Dark House, I believe it's called, which is one of those sort of rediscovered, like, haunted house movie gems, which got a reissue, I think it was last year. That's a really enjoyable one, quite underrated. It is, of course, adapted from a H.G. Wells novel, probably his most famous novel, and ever since this movie, The Invisible Man has appeared in many different guises. There's been many takes on this. I think it's notoriously one of the hardest of these films to really do well on film, and obviously back in this day where you were so limited effects wise and quite a low budget film and all that, it's very hard to pull off without it looking kind of hokey and gimmicky. But as you can see, a lot of talent attached to this. Gloria Stewart's in there as sort of the love interest. She's a bit in and out of the film, but yeah, she was tied to the lead character before he went off and became invisible, of course, after a science experiment goes wrong. So some big names in there, some pretty well-known actors of the time. William Hannigan's in there, Dudley Diggs, something like that, which I mentioned just because that's a fantastic name. Such a posh, old school sort of name. O'Connor, I like that name as well. So that is basically the setup. Now, one thing this film does a little bit differently to a lot of horror movies is that you actually see the Invisible Man, if you like, the monster of the piece. First, you actually see him as the Invisible Man. You don't just get the setup of how he becomes invisible or anything like that. You don't start off with, I guess, like a kill or something, which you would get in a lot of these films. You actually see him first. It starts off at a snowy inn, with a sort of a packed house, all these different characters making a lot of noise. One of those old fashioned sort of saloons. It sort of reminded me a lot of Cheers, but Cheers obviously circa the 30s or late 20s, wherever it's meant to be set. But it has that feel to it. And I will say one thing that dates this film a bit is just some of the talk and the language and the posh, really because it's set in England, or meant to be, and very, very kind of posh upper class sort of characters who use this really sort of fancy language. Very kind of outdated now, but it's one of those you just have to accept it, and I mean you either go with it and enjoy it, or you don't. And I did. I thought it added some character to the film, and I enjoyed having a laugh at it. So it's fine, but you do get some quite funny lines and interactions from those characters. And it's kind of perfect, the fact it's snowing outside, it really builds the atmosphere. So the Invisible Man sort of strolls in, and it's funny because there's a dartboard near where the entrance is, near where he comes in. So almost like a sort of a warning straight away, then he could have been hit with a dart. But he just appears in his goggles. And it's a great shot, really, because the whole room just stops dead. And it really takes everyone's aback, and this noisy, bustling pub suddenly comes to a standstill, and it's like the spotlight's on him, and he's got that distinct look. And again, it's interesting having the villain or the monster, however you want to phrase it. And again, there are like shades of light and dark to the character, but it's interesting having him introduced within the first scene. No sense of mystery. He's just invisible from the start. That's how you see him. And so he asks for a room for a night, which obviously he gets. And at first, they're very accommodating of him. But over time, he starts driving them crazy, because basically he is this recluse. He just wants a room. He just wants to hide away from the world. And he wants to do his experiments, essentially. And so that really gets the ire of the landlady eventually, because he just doesn't pay the rent. Well, rent's the wrong term, but he doesn't pay for his room. So that's eventually, she really loses it with him. And there's all sorts of funny lines in there. I love at one point one of the patrons, one of the customers in the pub, because they're all like gossiping about him. He says maybe he bumped his head on the prison wall, because they mention him sort of having like a bandage. And the old lady says he turned my room into like a chemistry shop or something like that, which is really great. But yeah, the reveal of the Invisible Man, or the mystery behind him. I mean, obviously, because of the title, that then he is invisible. But even so, it's really well handled. You see him in like these goggles, this mask. Obviously, he's all dressed up, so you can't actually see he's invisible from the start. And it's become one of the iconic shots of the film. So there's this real mystique behind him, and they slowly build up to revealing him. And Claude Rains, this is really a tour de force performance. I sort of liken it to almost as if he's like the Joker but invisible. So there's this real malevolence about him. He just revels in the evil, in really using this power to really pull the rug out from under people, to terrorize them. His laugh is very distinct, his voice is very distinct, but the character sort of changes over the course of the film. At first he's very much a recluse, and you do have some sympathy for him. He's definitely like traumatized by what's happened to him. He's confused, he wants to hide away from the world. But yeah, as I said, Claude Rains, such a distinct voice. It's a great physical performance as well, subtle sort of body movement. And he's just fantastic. I mean, it was perfect casting for the role. So the reveal when they finally find out that he's invisible is just wonderful. It's this real playful but, tense sort of scene. So his head's not there. And it's like pulling out this bag of tricks almost. And I mean, it is interesting because there is, as I said, shades of light and dark with the character. It's not cut and dry. He's not just, certainly not at the start. I mean, later on in the film, I think he becomes less sympathetic. He does become a full-on villain. He does. Basically, the power goes to his head. He just starts getting all these ideas, and I think that really taps into, it taps into like just the thesis of it, the kind of the condition and what it can lead to. It really plays into that. It's always one of these things when you watch these films, these stories, you think about it, well, how would I act if I was invisible? What would I do? And that's what this story does, and it really runs with it, because it really shows that over time he becomes less of a humanistic character and more of a monster, more of a clown. And there's lots of good stuff in the pub. It's a really good setting for this sort of thing. So glasses go flying. He at one point steals someone's bicycle out in the street, which is a great sort of visual scene. And at the same time he's taunting them and laughing, and So some great stuff, some great set pieces. And I think the psychology is just so well handled in it, and the way it looks at the full possibilities, and it explores it, and it gives you the backstory later on about how an experiment went wrong, and he went into hiding, and we also get to know, as I said, his girlfriend or ex-girlfriend, whichever it is, whose name is Flora or something, which again is a very old-fashioned sort of British sort of name, and obviously his kind of close friend, who's like another sort of scientist, who over time the Invisible Man goes to and gets him to help him out and sort of blackmails him in a way. And it becomes this whole thing, and what I like about it is it really shows the hysteria of this, the hysteria it creates, because obviously the police don't believe that there isn't an Invisible Man. They believe then the whole, city has just gone nuts, essentially, and that at one point the inspector calls it a hoax, and boy, would that be some hoax. But it really runs with the premise. And it has a lot of fun with it, but it also works as a creepy sort of horror movie. Some nice visual set pieces, as I said. I love him like just ghosting into like the house, with his I think his name's Kim, his like old sort of science buddy, and he literally just strolls in, and there's a sort of a mood and a tone to that scene, and the wind just coming in. It's all good stuff, but yeah, it feels quite authentic to how, if there was really an Invisible Man and all this happening, how the city might react, sort of thing. And I think it has a good time sending up some of the characters. So yeah, it gets a good mixture, where it's one of these films where it's not taking itself too seriously. I think it's very hammy, and there's some high camp, which I always enjoy, especially in these old films. But at the same time, it's very dramatic and suspenseful as well. Good casting. I think Claude Rains, without him, would the film wouldn't be as good, although the direction's very good as well. And yeah, there's a lot of good humour in it, and a lot of good ideas. It really plays with it, and not black and white, but it really stands up. As I said, some dated elements, but it's really well thought out, really well paced, and there's some good, as I said, some impressive set pieces and some funny moments. There's also this sort of idea of him almost being like a Robin Hood type figure, because at one point he robs a bank and he starts chucking the money out in the streets and giving it to the poor. And I think that's another theme in this story, the fact that he is kind of mostly he is terrorising the more middle class or upper class, um, people who work in banks. Because in these days it was very different. Most the people who were involved in banking were like middle or upper class. But so there is the sense that he is giving back to the poor sort of thing, even though you can't justify a lot of what he does. But yeah, it's a really entertaining film. It's a lot of good fun. I really like Kim's demise towards the end of the film. That's a really, in the car, it's a really distinct, clever scene. And it really thinks about the mythology a lot and goes into it, like the fact that he can't be out in the snow or the rain or sort of thing, he'll be exposed. It really goes into it in quite a lot of detail. But overall, I think you're just mostly meant to have a good time. He's an effective villain. He's entertaining to watch, or, well, watch may be the wrong word considering he's invisible, and listen to. But it's a really good time, nicely cast. It gets the right balance between being entertaining but also quite creepy, and yeah, it makes you think, sort of thing. So I've not read the book, but this was my first time watching this, which is why I thought I'd make it my first review of the month. So yeah, The Invisible Man I really liked a lot, and it's also very short. It's just over an hour. It's like an hour and 10 minutes something, so it's not going to take up a lot of time. So you should have a good time, I think, if you're into this sort of horror back in the day. So yeah, the original Invisible Man, my first movie of the month, my first horror review of the month, and I'm going to be really thrashing these out. There's also going to be some live streams. I guess before I go, I'll just rate the movie, which I will rate every horror movie I review and watch this month. So for The Invisible Man, 1933, I'll give it an 8 out of 10. I think it's very good. It's my first time watching it. I can't go as high as to say it's a masterpiece, but I do think it's a distinct film in the genre, and I think it stands out. Love Claude Rains' performance, so 8 out of 10 for me. But let me know what you think of the film if you've seen it in the comments below. And like and subscribe and give a rating of your own, of course. And I'll be back with my next horror review very shortly. And I won't reveal what it'll be. It'll be a surprise. But it's another biggie, that's all I'll say. So for now, I'm bored now. Thank you for listening. And good night.